So the description of the vehicle inspection process. First step is to check your VIN. So in the case of this Dodge Neon, typically the VIN will be right in this area. Dodge Neon here, it's right here. It's the VIN number. Oh, got it backwards. Here's the VIN number. Write that down. And this one says the date of manufacturer here is 500. Write that down. And this should be a 2000 because it's prior to September. Okay, mileage. Get that right now, or turn the key on to get the mileage. Know the make. You may not know the model. Make, model, and typically the trim will be right here below the model. This vehicle, it's on the sidebars. It's the ES. Then I start inside. Okay, so we already did the mileage, so windows. Check both windows. Take them all the way down. If you're gonna buy the car, if it's a customer car, just make sure it works. Check the mirrors. Check the door locks. And look at all the door locks.
All the seats.
Okay, and the seats, again, if you're going to buy the car and it's electric seat, you want to check it really thoroughly. Check all the seat belts. Make sure the seat belts are in good shape. Make sure the latches are in good shape. In this car, it'd be 5 seat belts you'd be looking at. If it's a customer's car, I would assume they can take care of that. It's not, we won't worry about that. Interior lights. Dome light works. And in this car, they has lights under the mirror. Alright, temperature control, you need to start the car. And this one we immediately know that the fan doesn't work because we're fixing that, but you check the fan, check all the vent positions with fan running, check your temperature control, make sure you can hear a change in pitch, which would tell you that you're on the cold side or the hot. Radio. Again, if it's a customer car, not such a big deal, but if you're buying it, definitely check it. Horn. Yeah, so we got a bad horn here. Horn should work, whether the key is on or off. Cruise control 4x4 control switch. This one does not have it, so just cross it off the list. E-brake. Should be about 7 clicks. Should feel some good tension at 7 clicks. This one's a little loose. Yeah. I'm not feeling much. A little bit, but not much. I would circle that as being out of adjustment. Okay, next step is to check the engine codes. So, find out where this one plugs in. Plug this one in. And check the codes. Okay, no engine DTCs, and then check your ABS codes. Uh-oh. SRS codes, maybe there wasn't ABS module on this one. And OEM enhanced, if it's supported. Okay, I checked all of them. There are no codes. And so turn the key off, unplug the module. And the rest of the inspection is now done the outside of the car. Next, check the windshield wipers. Looking at the quality of the rubber, making sure it's in good quality, that the ends aren't torn. Both ends. both windshield wipers. Next is the windshield. Looking at cracks and chips. I have a chip here on the driver's side. Okay, so this one has a chip and a crack starting right there. You can see it in the light. So this one has 3 chips, 1 crack. And that's the windshield. Carefully put this down, don't ever let it smack the window. That may have been what caused this actually, just the position of that. Is if this bar hits the windshield without the windshield wiper there, it can crack it. Okay, we're gonna check the headlights. On this car, should be, we got ones on the side too, so we have the ones on the front, ones on the side. Headlights, those are dims, bright, so bright and my dim work. Both blinkers work. Now we'll check the back. Okay, so the flashers are working, the taillights are working. License plate light is working. Key goes on. Foot on the brake. Put it in reverse. Engine is not running.
Yeah, they're on now.
Okay, now they're working. And then finally the brake lights. Brake lights working?
Yep.
Okay, one of the tricks I use if I can't have a helper to look at the brake lights is they'll reflect on the wall there. Just put my foot on the brake. You can see this wall lighting up and the other wall lighting up as well, so you know both brake lights work. You can see that pretty clearly. And the center brake light is the next question. So the way to do that, I've taped a piece of paper around the center brake light, and then from here I can now tell whether it's working or not. It looks like it is not working. Start on the engine inspection. This engine is really nice, and Daniel pointed out that it has yellow tabs for everything. So you don't have to guess. Start with the engine oil. Okay, there's engine oil. Quantity, well, let's wipe it. It's really clean. It's within the hash mark. I don't know if you can see that. There you go. It's within the hash mark. Quantity's good.
So we just replaced it.
It's clean. Quantity's good. So quality and quantity is good on that. This coolant level. This car, this is the coolant container. Sometimes it's hard just by shadows and stuff to see how full it is. So by putting the light right here, this thing's in the way. There you go, you can see the level really clearly when that light's on the container itself. You can see the level is right about here. Coolant, we want to check for quality, we want to do a pH test and a temperature test. So we won't pull that from that container there. We're going to pull that from the radiator cap itself. Cap off. Take a sample. Good sample. Right now I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 balls floating, and according to this there's negative 40 there. Floating balls, you can't read that very well, but if there's 5 it's good to negative 40. If there's 4 it's good to negative 25. Okay, the next step is to take a litmus test, check the acidity, and compare that to your chart. Yeah, it's an 8 or 9. I'd write an 8 for pH on that one. Okay, next is brake fluid or condition of brake fluid. Okay, brake fluid or condition of the brake fluid. The container is filthy, but the brake fluid itself isn't terrible. Not what you want for your brakes. I'd recommend a flush on that. A flush and cleaning of this reservoir. Here's how the brake reservoir looks when it's cleaned out. New brake fluid, flushed the whole system, and clean reservoir. Transmission fluid. To get the correct level, it needs to be idling and hot. So on a cold transmission, I just make sure it's on the dipstick, which it is. And the next thing I do is actually look at the clarity of the fluid. If it's really dark, it needs to be flushed. And you smell it. And if it smells burnt, then it needs to be flushed. Power steering fluid, really similar to transmission fluid. It's right between the full and the add. And the fluid, I smell it as well. If it smells burnt, then it needs to be flushed. It'll always smell a little bit like rubber, or I don't know how to describe it, but there is a smell where it becomes burnt. You can tell the clarity of it too by putting on a white surface. It's not too bad, a little bit dark. Some power steering fluids are clear to begin with, like Honda's, and others are red. So if you know where it started from, you know whether it's clear or how dark it is compared to what it started from. This car is an automatic, it's very basic, there's no differential. The differential is a part of the transmission on this one, it's a transaxle. The clutch fluid doesn't apply. In this case, it doesn't have the gearboxes like the front and rear diff or the transfer case. Okay, after checking the fluids, I want to check the hoses and the belts. So on these hoses, you can look at them visually. They'll be bulged really bad and really soft as they get old. Another thing they'll do is the threads will break when you push down on it. This one is not breaking, the internal threads are not breaking, so it's in good condition. On the hoses, the main hoses, the bigger the hose, the more pressure and stress on it. So the big ones will fail prior to the small ones usually. So I really do just focus on looking at the upper and lower radiator hose, and I consider the other hoses to be, unless these are brand new and it's on an old car, I wouldn't look at the other hoses. The belts, it's a pretty shiny surface on the serpentine belt. It's hard to tell. On a serpentine belt you need to look into the grooves. On this one I don't see access to see the grooves. On the belts, I should have grabbed a flashlight. It's helpful because there's actually two belts on this car. There's this main belt here that goes around the crankshaft pulley. Boy, it's hard to see. It's down in there, right there. Crankshaft pulley wraps around, comes up through the tensioner, automatic tensioner, the power steering pump, and the AC condenser. But then back here, there's another belt for the alternator, and that belt looks like it's in better shape. It's newer looking. The top is not scratched up on the alternator belt because it doesn't go around the backside of a pulley. Like this one has the tensioner pulley which goes around the backside of the belt, so it gets worn out more. I may have seen a small crack on this one down there. You can see a little. There we go, right there, a little mark on it is possibly a crack. It's hard to tell. So definitely recommend replacing that belt. That belt was pulled off as the customer decided to replace it on my recommendation, and you can see how cracked up the ridges are. Completely cracked up on this belt, but you couldn't really truly tell before. Now it's really clear. That might have been that crack that I thought I saw. So yeah, it's a good call for that one. Okay, battery date and condition. There's no date on this battery, which is not helpful. The terminal condition is pretty good. There's not a lot of corrosion on it. A little bit of corrosion on the sides. There's no corrosion protection either, but it looks in good shape. Oh, one other element on the battery is sometimes there's sulfuric acid just leaking out of it. This one's a sealed battery, but if there's sulfuric acid leaking out of it and the sides are distorted or warped, then what you're dealing with is probably someone who sits in traffic a lot, runs the stereo, runs all of his electronics a tremendous amount. The battery's being sucked down and charged a lot, or just receiving a high rate of charge consistently because of the amount of electronic use they have. And those batteries wear out faster. Next is the air filter. I need to open this up and take a look at that. It's fairly unusual, but the air filter is clean on this car. Air filter is checked and it looks good. So just a tip about jacking vehicles. Right now I'm up on a center cross piece of the subframe on a Dodge Neon. And as I go up, these wheels need to align themselves with the axis of the car, the longitudinal axis, and these wheels need to move forward. Okay, so now the wheels should align and go and start moving forward. There we go. See that? You want to see those wheels move as you jack. That's the movement you want. Next on the list, we're looking for leakage on the vehicle. One of the biggest keys, obviously, is to look at the ground and see if there's any fluid leaks. In this case, there was kind of a bluish-green fluid on the front right corner of the vehicle, and This is dripping from right here. This is our biggest concern. That's our biggest concern. I can smell it. It doesn't smell like coolant. So I just need to trace that up and see where it's coming from. Oh, I don't like seeing it there. It starts feeling like a water pump when I see it there. I see more material here. I see a lot more here. That looks very greenish, coolant-ish. Well, some of that might have been when I pulled the cap off. Yeah, okay, so here's the stuff we see on the ground. Right here. It's right on the bottom of the windshield washer container. The coolant that I'm seeing... that might have been when I did the test, that I splashed some. That is a fair bit, but I do remember that on the top of this belt system is where the cap is. So unusual, but the cap is right above this, and I did spill some. You can see the spill. And that would have gone right down to where we're looking at. And most importantly, the coolant was not low. So I think we're probably looking at, in this case, it's most likely just that I spilled a little bit of coolant, which was unfortunate. It kind of makes our inspection more difficult. Worth noting to the customer a potential coolant leak. Okay, oil leaks. There's some oil down here behind the oil pan, so there is some oil leaking. Possibly an oil pan seal, and the reason for that is that the oil pan shows moisture here. But if you look above it, there isn't moisture. Remember, fluids move downwards and backwards on the engine. So if you find one on the lowest point, most furthest back, it could be anything above and in front of that location. In this case, it's on the back of the oil pan. It's not above that point, and so this is the highest point it's coming from. So the oil pan is leaking. Look at the front. Boy, this engine is dirty. Wow. It looks like the front of the oil pan is leaking oil as well. This is also a good opportunity to look at the lower coolant hose here. Give it a good squeeze. It's the lower radiator hose. Looks good. Sorry, it's hard for you to see where I'm at because I'm right up against the engine here. Okay, so we did oil leaks, coolant leaks. Let's look at transmission fluid leaks. Coming over here to the transmission. Here's the transmission oil pan. And there's some moisture. So there is at least a little bit of transmission fluid coming out. Or it's oil. It's hard to tell when an engine gets this dirty whether it's oil or transmission fluid or what it is. You'd have to fix the oil leak and then clean everything up, drive it a little bit, and see where the fluid's leaking. I'd say a potential transmission fluid leak too, as it's a long ways for the oil to migrate all the way to the far side of the transmission.
All leak checks, right?
Yeah, well, power steering fluid leaks. Power steering fluid.
Oil, coolant, power steering.
Okay, power steering fluid. We look at the power steering control box, which is right above here. Maybe I can get up through here and see it better. There's a steering control arm. Well, usually on the driver's side you can see it better because that's where it is. I don't see a lot of fluid below this. This is where it would be. It'd be all along this area here if there was a power steering fluid leak. And then usually the control, power steering control, there's some hoses. Those look really dry, that's good. You can see those lines there. Right there. And those would be, those connections are often where the power steering fluid leaks. And this whole unit here, the power unit, a little bit of dampness on the bottom of it, not bad though. And then of course, most importantly, on the frame directly below it, there's no piles of oil or grease. So I do have a little bit of an angle on the power steering box. There we go, and you can see it that it is showing signs of leakage there. Not severe though. If you have a little bit of grease or dirt on it, that's normal for an older car. Once that grease or dirt starts washing away because the fluid is leaking so rapidly, that's when you say you have an excessive leak or an active drip. Another angle on the power steering box. from behind by the exhaust, and we can see most of it is in great shape. Timing belt due. No, we didn't do timing belt due. First of all, we need to determine whether this engine has a timing belt. Looking at the engine, the timing belt is on what would be considered to be the front of the engine, which is where the belts are. And it'd be one step behind the belts. If there's a plastic cover, then it's most likely a timing belt. And if it's a metal cover that would have oil moving through it, then it's a timing chain. The plastic cover is right down in there. It's a black plastic cover. So what we're looking at is we do have a timing belt. When the timing belt was done last, I don't know. We do know there's 177,000 miles on this engine. I see no stickers or record of the timing belt. So that is a pretty major concern for this engine. So we'll circle that one. Okay, pinion seals, gearbox seals, axle seals, that applies to four-wheel drive, so cross that off. Okay, it's jacked up in the air, and prior to taking the wheels off, it's a good idea to check the steering ball joints, or just steering system. And that's a lot of play in the steering system. There should be a tenth of that. Okay, just by way of comparison, here's one. This is the same car, and now the steering ball joints have been repaired. So there is, the steering actually moves, but there's no clunking, no movement at all. Let me show you how those ball joints looked in my hand. Okay, see how well you can see this here. See that movement? There should be no movement at all. These ball joints are getting close to just popping out, which would lose control of the vehicle. So it's not a situation you want to be in. Here's the other one. Not quite as bad. And up and down, I'm pushing and pulling, and anything I feel here is likely in the, if it's not the steering, it's likely in the wheel bearing itself. Some feels worse. We're gonna have to investigate that, figure out what's causing that. And back tires. Now in this one, the e-brake actually worked, so I need to release that in order to shake it. So e-brake's released. No shake on that one. Check the last tire. And I'm gonna check the e-brake on that one too, because e-brake was really loose, remember? There you go, the left tire has no e-brake at all. Using an impact driver to remove the wheels. Always at the beginning of the day, always add oil to the driver. Press the trigger so it goes down into the mechanism. Hook it up to air. Make sure it's on the removal, not tightening. Okay, with the correct socket on here, make sure it fits snug but not super tight. If it goes super tight, go 1 millimeter larger. Make sure the gun is on the removal. Make sure it's not on the...
Very, very important.
This is very, very important. If you put it all the way cranked up, you could actually just break that stud and cause a lot more work. It's on the removal, and the socket goes all the way down on the lug nut. And then just tap it. Don't just lock your finger on, but tap it. Now in this case, the lug nut is stuck on the socket, so I'm going to screw it back in a couple of threads and pull the socket off. I think I'm going to go with a nut 1 millimeter, just one size bigger on these. A little too snug. This might be too big. Yeah, it's too big. Okay, we'll stick with this and just keep doing that procedure. And just this time I won't take it all the way off. Or screw it back on if it does go all the way off. There we go. Now it can just be removed by hand. I have 3 hands, it's kind of handy. Tire can come off. Now this tire came off really easily. Sometimes you need to bang the edge of the tire with a rubber mallet to get it to break loose, as this right in here, the rust and corrosion can cause it to seal. Right in here, sometimes this lip seals and corrodes into the wheel. All the lug nuts go down by the jack, and repeat that process for the other 3 tires. Okay, so once the wheels and tires are removed, they just go underneath the vehicle, tucked under like that. For vehicle inspection, obviously, if you're doing work underneath the vehicle or looking at a differential, transfer case, gearbox oils, you might need to place them outside the shop or in a place that would be out of your way. In this case, our quest to find a better socket was not rewarded. The 19mm fit the best. You can see the engagement there is nice. It's too snug though, this thing gets stuck in it. The next size up though, in this case I think 13/16 or 21mm, is just too loose. It's too much slop, or we'd be in danger of stripping out the hex pattern on the lug nut. So we just stick 19mm and just endure the slow process of backing it out, but not all the way, and screwing in a thread in order to remove the socket. Okay, so brakes. Check the brake pad thickness. 3/8 of an inch of pad, and so that's your 100%. And this one's at 1/4, so you're about 60-70%. Your brake rotor shouldn't be blue, discolored. That'd be overheated, and we're looking for cracks and ridges. Okay, when looking at the brake discs, you can see the ridges, and the ridges, if they're as thick as 4 or 5 sheets of paper. I don't remember the exact dimension, but then it's considered to be excessive. The other thing to notice is the lip right on the top of this. And that lip, the edge of this lip represents the original thickness, and the pads have worn down through. In this case, this is well over 4 to 5 sheets of paper. And so the wear on this is probably excessive. How much? What is the minimum wear? Should be stamped right on it somewhere. I don't see any stamps, so we'd have to get into. Oh, check this out. This is an original, factory original. See the clip here? It's never been removed for the life of this vehicle. So pretty much guarantee this thing is at 180,000 miles. It's done really well. Pretty much guarantee that it's below our minimum, but we'd have to check the manual. I don't see the stamps. We have to get a caliper. Check this with a micrometer. Problem is I can't slide it off, so I just need to read it with it on there. The camera go up over here. This one's in inches, and it's a 1-inch micrometer. So these are tenths of an inch. And you can see we're all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then you can see the gaps between 7 and 8. There's 3, so it's 725, 750, 775. It's basically in quarters between those tenths, so it's extra confusing. 8, and I can just barely see the first quarter after 8, so the full number would be 0.8 inches, 0.825, and then these are the thousandths, so it's 0.825 plus 9 thousandths, because it's between 9 and 10, so 25 plus 9 is 3/4. And then you can go down to 10 thousandths, but that's not a concern right now. So it's 0.834. Because after I remove this and return it to this size, it'll fit in the box. Just don't bottom it all the way down and store it in the box with that small gap. So this one proves that it's bad. Then we replace it as a set. So there's no need to measure the other side as well. This one's actually just a little bit thinner in the front right for some reason. Okay, and I can see the back pad thickness as well, and I'll check the back pad thickness on the right hand side as well. That's important because sometimes they wear unevenly. There you go, back pad thickness on the right hand. They're wearing evenly, which is good. On rear drum brakes, you gotta remove the drum. So I usually do that with a crowbar. Preferably one on either side. It's starting to come. This is a big service to the customer. They can know what condition their brakes are in. In this case, you can see it kind of loosens up quite a bit with the hammer. Very carefully in the middle so you don't damage any of the threads on the lug nuts. Just getting caught up on the brake break a shoe themselves. There we go, it's starting to come. Yeah, this is a challenge. So I'm pulling from this side and banging this side, and it seems to be coming. It's getting close. There we go. This one does not want to come off. Boom. Okay, so the brake inspection is the pad thickness on the shoes, no fluid leaking from the wheel cylinder. The drum, look into the drum. Make sure, check the grooves, make sure it's not blue, so signs of overheating. And this goes tap back on. Again, be very careful not to hit the lug nuts. You don't want to damage any of the threads on the lugs. Nice and evenly all around. Solidly seated. Okay. Do the same inspection on the other side. Look at the pads, look at the drum, look at whether it's overheated, look for fluid loss. And the brake inspection is complete. One of the things I like to look at for the brake system is these rubber flex lines on the front brake system. Check the routing, make sure the left and the right match, and that the rubber flex line doesn't have any signs of cracking, especially on an older car. So that one's securely in a clamp on the left hand side. The right hand side is also securely in a clamp and routed exactly like the left hand side. It's pretty nice on this car, it's very easy to see that. Some cars the routing is more complex and you need to pay more attention to where it is. If it moves too close to the tire, it can rub on the tire, create a wear mark that is dangerous. The suspension of the vehicle, there's a couple of things we could have noticed ahead of time before we pulled everything off. And one was to do a finger check, which is how many fingers above the wheel well are the tires. And you do that on all 4 tires, make sure they're really close to the same. Interestingly, it looks like this spring has been rubbing on the tire. The suspension is primarily an inspection for oil leakage on the strut. In this case it's dry, clean and dry in there. There's no leakage at all. If there's leakage you'd see that streaked with oil or dirt stuck to oil. Do that same thing on the other shocks. Okay, left shock, again clean and dry. Well, not clean, but it's dry. Left shock is dry. Rear shock struts are dry, left rear, and the right rear. Dry. When inspecting the CV boots, there's 4 on a front wheel drive vehicle. There's 1 there, no oil, grease, coming out. Be 1 inside here. Way back there by the transmission. I'll get under the car to inspect that. Okay, CV boot, there's no oil or grease, no cracks in it. And you can rotate it to make sure, but usually when there's a grease leakage, you'll see it sprayed out on pieces around the CV boot. That's the inner CV boot on the right hand side. Moving to the inner CV boot on the left hand side. Outer CV boot left hand side. They all look intact. Wheel bearings were essentially checked when we rocked the tires. The next step to inspect the wheel bearings if you suspect that they're bad is to remove the caliper and the disc and then spin the bearing. And basically you want to get the noise of the caliper rubbing on the disc out of there so you can listen to the bearing. To really inspect it well, you need to remove the axle as well so you can spin it freely with nothing else interfering with your sound and feel. But at this point, doing a vehicle inspection, we don't remove the caliper or the disc. We just check the rocking of the tire. That's how we check that. Next on the list are ball joints. In this vehicle, the ball joints are in this area right here. You're looking at the ball joint boot. So that boot is right there. And you want to make sure that boot isn't cracked If it is cracked, that ball joint is likely going to start getting loose very, very quickly. You can see some early signs of crackage. Often there's one on the top, crackage, early signs of it starting to crack. Now we'll check the left hand side as well, same thing. And the next thing are the steering ball joints. Steering ball joints are the same thing. You're looking for it being cracked. In this vehicle we notice a lot of play on the steering system. There's a steering bellows, or it looks like a boot, but it's called a bellows. Let's go ahead and shake the steering system, see if we can figure out where that play is happening. Okay, so to do this, I'm going to grab this disc and also the piece behind the disc, which is part of the hub, so that I'm not just grabbing the brake disc. But here it goes. Look at that relative play in that steering ball joint. That's really bad. Those ball joints are completely shot. And I'm grabbing the post on the bottom to make sure it's not in the bore on the hub here. It's actually in the ball joint, which is up here. And so the steering rod ends, this whole rod end needs to be replaced. It's an assembly. And that's on the right hand side. Let's double check the left hand side. Same thing. Grabbing this post. It's definitely in the ball joint. Oh, look at that. Could have just grabbed it there. This ball joint is completely worn out. The bellows is in good shape. That's a good thing to check right now because it's really easy to replace when you have the ball joints off. Again, this car is not four-wheel drive, so the CV axle boots are not applicable for the back like they would be on a Subaru or a four-wheel drive vehicle that has boots in the back. Okay, spare tire pressure is the last thing on the list. Filling up a spare tire. We got lucky on this car. Usually typically you have to take apart the whole trunk and remove the spare tire, but this one, the valve stem is sitting right on top. Okay, there it is. Inflate to 60 psi.
60 psi.
There it is. Okay, you need to hold the tire jack on nice and firmly. Boom, right there. Excellent. So last step is to down jack the vehicle, put the tires on, down jack it, and torque the lug nuts. For installing the tires, I've called these wheels and tires, and that's what they are. And this is the wheel, this is the tire. So it's a wheel tire assembly, but that takes too long to say. You can just call them tires or just wheels. Start all the lug nuts by hand so you don't cross thread them. Don't use a machine to start lug nuts. Okay, once they're all started by hand, a couple of threads, make sure they're not cross threaded. Then just use a small light duty electric impact driver and put them on. This is a really light duty. This isn't much torque, but it's enough torque so that when I down jack the vehicle, this tire isn't going to come off. Okay, so these guys go. I'll do a star pattern. There we go. Okay, so this is a great example of a lug nut that someone has put the wrench on incorrectly, not all the way seated down. And as you can see how it has distorted the chrome cover. However, it is just a chrome cover, and underneath that is the actual lug nut, which looks like this, except this one has also been put put on with the wrong tool. The cover has actually started to deteriorate. Here's what a good one looks like. So if you put the wrench on properly or the socket on properly, they should all look like this and not look like these distorted and partially destroyed lug nuts. So be really careful when you encounter this. Make sure that the socket goes on as far as you can get on it and apply torque very lightly and slowly to make sure you're not destroying anything. Okay, in this car the torque is 100. You can see the 110 line is still exposed. So we are at 0 at the 100 line. Okay, and our torque procedure for the axle lug nuts after we have the spec is... Here, let me set that spark brake so it doesn't roll like that. Sorry, you start here?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so get either one of those, yeah. Approach the torque slower, actually. There you go. There you go. And after doing the star pattern, go all around in a circle. When holding the torque wrench, hold it right on the handle, right in the middle. hold this firm. And if you get this situated so your weight can just sit on it, then it's a lot easier. Approach it nice and slowly so you're not over torquing it. That is torque now. So start pattern, and then once around the circle, and the wheels are torqued. The format of it may change, but we will always have a double check lug nut torque. So make sure you sign and date, or sign and torque spec what torque you torqued it to on the documentation. The axle lug nut spec is not 100 foot-pounds for every vehicle. That needs to be cross-referenced with wheel torque chart online, or ProDemand also lists that torque spec. Either you or the manager will sum up all the findings and come up with a quote for the customer. That's it. Vehicle inspection is complete.